Hey guys, welcome back. So continuing with the theme of sensory organs, I want to talk now about how the body detects sound. So sound detection. And if we remember from our high school physics class, sound is a mechanical wave with alternating areas of high pressure and low pressure that's being transmitted through a media, usually air, and the body can capitalize on sound's ability to cause things to vibrate because those alternating areas of high pressure and low pressure, when they come into contact with something, they'll cause it to vibrate. And because it does that, the body uses that to convert sound signals into electrical signals. And remember, electricity is just the flow of ions. And so what is this process of converting one signal into another? You got it, transduction, our old friend. So now let's look at how the ear does that. So first, to understand that, we have to know the anatomy of the ear. So here's our external ear called the pinna. And the pinna continues on as the external auditory canal and ends in the tympanic membrane. And this area of the ear is called the external ear. Next, we have three bones connected to the tympanic membrane. The first is called the malleus, which is Latin for hammer because it looks like a hammer. The second is called the incus because incus is Latin for anvil and it looks like an anvil. And the third is called the stapes, which is Latin for stirrup. And it looks like a stirrup, and a stirrup, if you don't know, is what you put your feet in when you're riding a horse with a saddle. So this is called the ossicular chain, and these three bones make up the middle ear. And the stapes is connected to a membrane called the oval window. Oval window. And it's a window into a relatively larger organ, though it's pretty small if you actually look at it, called the cochlea. And the cochlea looks like a little snail. And cochlea is Latin for snail. And also in this cochlea is another window called the round window. So this is the cochlea. And the cochlea makes up, and a few other things that we'll talk about later, but this makes up the inner ear. So let's look at how the cochlea converts sound waves into electrical signals. So if we were to take the cochlea and we were to unroll it, so we would make it straight, and then we were to cut it in half hot dog style so that half of it would fall out of the screen towards you and half of it would fall into the screen away from you. And then we were to look at the inside of half of the cochlea, we would see something pretty cool. So let me draw it here. And the cochlea is essentially divided into three chambers. And to orient you where we are in the cochlea, here on this chamber begins as the oval window, and this chamber ends in the round window. So this upper chamber is called the scala vestibuli, and this lower chamber is called the scala tympani. And this middle chamber here is called the scala media. And as you can see, the scala vestibuli is continuous with the scala tympani. So, whenever we have a sound wave that comes into the ear, going back up here, whenever a sound wave is going into the ear, It gets collected and funneled into the external auditory canal, and it vibrates the tympanic membrane. And that's going to cause the ossicular chain to swing back and forth, kind of like little levers. And this is important because the sound wave is traveling in air, but ion flows occur in a fluid. So we need to get the alternating pressure waves from air into fluid. And the way the ear does that is using this ossicular chain connected to the oval window. So, as the stapes pumps the oval window in and out, it's going to transmit those pressure waves into these fluid-filled compartments, the scala vestibuli, then onto the scala tympani, and then finally the round window is going to pump in and out as well. And while this is going on, the scala media, it's going to vibrate. And the reason that's important is because throughout the length of the scala media, we have a special organ called the organ of Corti. And the organ of Corti looks like this. It has an upper membrane and it has a lower membrane. Let me redraw that. Lower membrane. And this upper membrane is called the tectorial membrane. And this lower membrane is called the basilar membrane. And on the basilar membrane, we have hair cells. And the reason that they're called hair cells is because on their apex, they have these little projections that look like hairs. And these projections have names. So if we were to zoom in on one of these hair cells, it would look something like this. Here's the nucleus. It has one really long projection, and it has a bunch of smaller projections. And the longest projection is called the kinocilium. And the shorter projections are called the stereocilia. And on the tips of the stereocilia, we have these special channels. And these channels are special because of the way that they're gated. So these channels, they're connected to these spring-like proteins that connect the channel to the adjacent stereocilia. And what happens, as you can imagine, as this organ of Corti is vibrating, as the sound wave moves through the scala vestibuli and scala tympani, because this tectorial membrane and basilar membrane have offset hinges, when they vibrate, they're going to shear past one another, and these hair cells are going to shear across the tectorial membrane. And as they shear and bend, these green proteins called tip links are going to pull open these channels. And when these channels get pulled open, potassium can then flow into the cell. And when potassium can flow into the cell, because potassium is in high concentration in the fluid around the hair cells, it's going to depolarize the cell. That's going to allow calcium to flow into the cell because these are voltage-gated channels. And when calcium flows into the cell, it's going to allow these vesicles to release their neurotransmitter onto, here's a neurotransmitter, it's going to allow it to release it on the afferent neuron going to the brain. So here's the afferent neuron, and that's going to go to the brain, specifically the auditory cortex. And so now you see how the ear was able to convert sound, which is a mechanical wave, and capitalizing on its ability to cause things to vibrate, it was able to allow it to cause it to vibrate the organ of Corti, which converted it into an electrical signal that could be then recognized by the brain. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.